Hi, and welcome to the Right to Remain Silent podcast. I'm Jim Weber, your host and guide through actual accounts of intriguing and fascinating true crime stories as told by the law enforcement professional that experienced the event. The Right to Remain Silent podcast makes no exaggeration of fact, doesn't glamorize details, or sensationalize reality. The format here is basic. Real stories from real cops. Lastly, please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Doing this will help me continue to provide you, the listener, with captivating and relevant true crime stories. Now, let's listen in on today's episode. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Weber, and today's guest is Mark Sewell, a retired special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And our discussion topic today is Mark's Stolen Valor investigation of an individual falsely claiming to have been awarded the Purple Heart. Mark, welcome to the podcast. It is fantastic to talk to you. I appreciate your time.
Hello, Jim. Thank you for having me, and it's good to see you again. You and I have done this before, so I appreciate you having me back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate you. Hey, and just to give listeners some context about you, would it be all right if I share your background, maybe read your bio?
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, will do. Here we go. Mark Sewell is a retired FBI agent who also served 9 years in the United States Marines, both enlisted and commissioned. Mark joined the FBI in 1997 and worked on the Atlanta Organized Crime Squad for 10 years, investigating the New York-based mafia, among others. Next, Mark spent 10 years in North Georgia investigating both street and outlaw motorcycle gangs as a member of an FBI Safe Streets Task Force. Since retirement in 2017, Mark has worked for the FBI as a contract instructor, teaching human to new agents. Since Mark is also a true crime author, detailing in his memoir, investigating America's most notorious strip club, the FBI, the Gold Club, and the Mafia. His experience in America's most sensational mafia trial of its era. Today, Mark resides with his wife in Southeast Texas. Mark has 4 grandchildren and is a 2-time CrossFit Games master athlete. That is awesome, Mark. That's a fantastic bio.
Well, that last sentence about being a CrossFit Games athlete in the Masters division just means that I'm old, Jim. So that's all that means. They have to create categories for the old guys.
Well, that's kind of something to brag about, though, because you and I, and all the similarities we have as federal agents and a long, law enforcement career, we're quite the opposite once you hit that CrossFit athlete thing. I'm the opposite. So
All right. Yeah.
kudos to you. And like you said earlier, I just want to remind listeners that you were originally a guest on the podcast back in September of last year, almost a year ago, in episode 9. And so you were the top 10 of the first guests of this
How about that?
podcast. So
Yeah.
I greatly appreciate you coming back.
Well, that's cool. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And just to mention a little bit about that episode, that was a fascinating conversation about your investigation of the Gold Club, which was a strip club that involved investigating the mafia. And there were so many different intricacies sprinkled into that. There were professional athletes as part of this story and mafia across the country. So I would encourage listeners to circle back to episode 9 of the podcast to hear that story that you told.
Yeah, it was a good case. It was the most profitable strip club in America at the time, making $9 million a year in 1997 money. So it was a treasure trove to the Gambinos. So it was a high profile case for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I certainly want to mention this. You wrote a book about that investigation, and that, I try to buy and read each guest book. And, I've got 38 episodes now, and a lot of the guests have written books. So I've done a lot of reading in the past year. I want to say your book, Investigating America's Most Notorious Strip Club, the FBI, the Gold Club, and the Mafia, was one of the most interesting and entertaining books that I've read of all the guests that I've had here. So I just want to let people know that that book is available on Amazon. You can get that at Barnes and Noble. And then, is there anywhere else that folks can get a hold of that book, Mark?
Yeah, sure. Everywhere. Walmart, and then of course the publisher, which is now Bloomsfield. So, or Bloomsbury. They keep changing names, but any of those places, yeah, for sure.
Okay, outstanding. Well, hey, let's get into our conversation today about Mark Sewell and your background and the case that you work. Why don't you start out and maybe tell us a little bit about why it was that you got into law enforcement and specifically the FBI?
Yeah, sure. I was a Marine stationed in Hawaii in year number 9 of my career. That's a tough tour, Jim, to be in Hawaii, but I was willing to do it for my country, right?
Somebody's got to do that.
The things we do, right? But look, I was coming up on a time in my career. This was before the wars, and things were a little slower, and all the things that go with that. We sign up looking for challenges, and we weren't getting a lot of those throughout the 90s. So I came to a point in my career where I needed to decide if I was going to stay in. And I didn't want to lose the 9 years that I already had, almost 10. So it's not uncommon to transfer from the military to another law enforcement or to another federal agency,
Mhm.
and you get to keep the years of service and take them with you. Whether you go HSI or FBI, or it doesn't matter. You get to take that time with you. So I looked around, and a recruiter had come on base for the FBI and made a real good pitch. And I decided I would go that route. And I already had a top secret SCI clearance, which set me up really good to pass the background, because I'd already passed that background from the military, from the Marines. And I was selected and joined in the summer of 97. And 20 years and 6 months was my career.
Okay, good deal. And I think I know the answer to this question, but I got to ask it. Do you think your military experience, your experience in the Marines, helped you throughout your FBI career?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I think it helped me get hired. First of all, I think
Hmm.
that's for sure. And then everything from tactics to physical fitness, but also just people skills. That you're not working by yourself in a cubicle. You're working with a squad. You're working with a platoon. Yeah, that was a no-brainer. So absolutely, that's a good question, and the answer is yes.
All right, good deal. All right, let's kind of roll up the sleeves and start talking about your stolen valor investigation. And when I use that term, maybe not everybody knows what that means, stolen valor. You and I do. Clearly, you do from the investigations that you've conducted, the experiences you've had. But I thought maybe we could start out with, could you tell us a little bit, just give a general description and walk us through what stolen valor is?
Yeah, I've got some notes here, Jim, and I want to make sure
Sure.
that I don't miss anything. But Stolen Valor came from a title of a 1990 book by a guy with the last name of Burkett. He had been a Vietnam veteran, and um, he titled his book "Stolen Valor: How the Vietnam Generation Lost Its Heroes." And he went on to describe that it's not just stealing valor and service and medals that you didn't earn, but is also disparaging the Vietnam generation. That that generation came back. World War II came back as heroes, Vietnam came back as, everybody's a psycho, and
Right.
baby killers and that kind of thing. So that was the purpose of his book. But the title, Stolen Valor, became part of the American lexicon. And interestingly now, guys like you and I and others in our circle, we all know what that word means. But up until 1999, no one ever heard those two words put together like that. So he actually created a term that 25 years later is part of the American lexicon. But it is exactly that, Jim. It's stealing or falsely claiming service and or medals that you didn't earn. And it can range from the little to the big. And there's laws that now um, capture what you can and can't do under the Stolen Valor label. It's been adjudicated up to the Supreme Court level. We can talk about that if you want, but it's now grown into its own industry, quite frankly. You and I were talking about in warm-ups that there's other podcasts, the guys that go out and do nothing but expose Stolen Valor guys. It's its own market now.
Right. Absolutely. That's a great description there. And it, just to, add on and second what you're saying there, this is a big deal. This is a very important topic. There are federal laws, federal statutes created to address this type of criminal behavior. So, not only is it, what I wanted to mention was not only is it illegal, it's a crime, but it's fascinating to see the deception and the mindset of the individuals that why they do this and the steps that they go to portray themselves in these scenarios. So I think listeners are going to find our conversation today eye-opening and very interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
Jim. There's two motivations for someone to be involved in Stolen Valor, and I kind of consider it like the 80-20 rule. 80% of the guys, and it's almost exclusively men, although there have been some women, it's almost exclusively men. 80% of those guys are doing it for one reason, and it's nothing more than the pat on the back. The other 20% are doing it for the financial fraud because they manipulated somebody in the scam that they're running, making them believe that they're a wounded veteran or a hero of some type, and therefore they're able to receive donations or receive financial benefits because of that link to the Stolen Valor. But that's the minority, and the majority is nothing more than I just want people to think that I'm a hero. And I'm looking for the pat on the back and the thank you for your service and the attention that goes with that.
well said. Well said. That's a great point. Well, now that we know what stolen valor is, let's kind of get into it here and talk about it. There was an individual, and his name is Shane Ladner, and an investigation was conducted on this subject. Tell us how this came about. How did this originate? How did this person and his behavior land on your radar?
Yeah. Before I can answer that, I think I have to tell you why. Part of that answer is going to be I was known in the Georgia FBI as the Stolen Valor guy. And in fact, later the SAC there said, hey, route all Stolen Valor leads through me, through Mark Sewell. And not because I had any great expertise, but I had first worked one of these cases right after 9/11, going back to 2001.
Hmm.
And I continued to bump into these through word of mouth and et cetera. And the way Shane Ladner, and I'm telling you that story to say the way the Shane Ladner landed with me is that the local jurisdiction that made the initial arrest had heard through a task force officer that, hey, Mark Sewell just finished one of these cases, by the way. He might be able to help us. How about we bring him into this case? And so it was kind of a recommendation, word of mouth, that brought me into the Ladner case because I'd worked other cases like that.
Okay. All right. Now this individual, um, there's so many layers to this onion in this investigation. There's an interesting fact about Ladner, and that in reading and preparing for our conversation today, this guy was a police officer, right?
Yeah. Uh, the answer is yes. He was a police officer when he was arrested. He had been an officer for about, I think, for about 7 years at the time of his arrest. He had been in the military before, bounced around, and then his last 7 years leading up to our introduction, he was a small town police officer in North Georgia.
Okay. And that was my next question. Maybe you could kind of tell us what region or area this was in and what was the time frame that this investigation began, and just kind of walk us through, once he landed on your radar there, kind of walk us through what you did.
Yeah, so he was a police officer in a little town called Holly Springs, which is used to be North Georgia and used to be rural, but today it is all part of Metro Atlanta as the sprawl continues. Cherokee County is north of Cobb County, and Cobb County is the home of the Atlanta Braves, for example. So that kind of gives you an idea of the proximity to Atlanta. It's commuter country, it's bedroom country up there now. Everybody commutes into Atlanta. But when Shane was a police officer up there, it was a little smaller, a little bit more rural. That police department maybe had, I think, 20 police officers sworn on its roll. So not a real big agency. But this case started in 2012, and it started with a Veterans Day parade in Midland, Texas. And of all the cases that I've ever worked, and I've worked enough cases that I've had enough life experiences to get a flavor of everything. This case had more weird and unique turns than any other case I ever worked, to include, my mafia cases, my motorcycle undercover cases, and so on. When Shane was on a parade float with some other veterans in 2012 in Midland, Texas. And I'll set the stage for you, Jim. This parade went like this. It was a long weekend to take these guys out on a big game West Texas hunt, to recognize them for their uh, service to the country. They had all been wounded veterans, and this was a continuing every year evolution for an organization called Show of Support. And what they did as part of the parade, Jim, is they took an 18-wheeler, a semi truck, and they attached a long flatbed trailer to it, and basically put a white tablecloth over this flatbed trailer to dress it up, make it look good. Put these chairs, just simple office chairs, stacked them 2 by 2 down, as I recall, 2 on the left, 2 on the right, and there was an aisle down the middle. That's how wide the flatbed trailer was. So you could put 4 across, about 10 deep, or 8 or 10 deep. So you had somewhere 20 plus on each trailer. And husband and wife would sit on the trailer, and the trailer, there was 2 of them to hold everyone, was basically driven slowly through town, through the town square, and all in a planned sequence of events. And people would stand on the corners and wave, like you do in a parade.
Sure.
And that's the way it went. And it had gone like that for years. And it was very effective, and people appreciated it. Well, these 2 flatbed trailers on this particular day, Jim, one went across a train track and got stopped at a red light that had about a dozen cars in front of that. So it was really backed up. The second flatbed trailer goes across the train track and gets stuck in traffic. And Jim, the trailer is left sitting on the railroad track.
Oh, that's no good.
And you know what's going to happen next,
Right.
right? That's the worst foreshadowing ever.
Right.
60 miles an hour, a Union Pacific train rolls through there and hits that flatbed trailer with those veterans and their wives on it. it makes almost like a blind curve and comes around and hits it. The folks on it had just enough warning that some of them were able to jump off. The problem was in the panic, a lot of them jumped the wrong direction, and actually the trailer was knocked into them.
Mm.
So right, you'd actually want to jump into the trailer, into the train, because the energy is going to go the way the train is going. And unfortunately and tragically, 4 veterans died on that parade float, and those 4 were bona fide heroes. One had been a Delta operator, one had been a Green Beret, retired, both of those guys. One had been medically retired as a sergeant in the Army, 3 Army folks, and the 4th was a chief warrant officer in the Marines that had been retired due to multiple TBIs.
That is tragic.
Yeah, makes national headlines, Jim. Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, even issues a statement, expressing condolences. There's about 12 people that end up in the intensive care units of the local hospitals. They're borderline not going to live as well. Now, luckily, all 12 of those injured did survive, but one of those, of that 12, lost her leg. She was the worst of the 12, and it was a high leg loss. If you're familiar with, with the wars, we've seen lots of amputees now. Depending on where you lose your leg, really can set you up for a productive life, or you're going to be handicapped the rest of your life. Can a prosthetic fit on it, and so on? The higher you go on the leg, the worse. This lady lost her leg at the highest possible point you can, right up to the hip. It was really bad. Well, that lady's named Meg Ladner, and she's Shane Ladner's wife, and she's sitting next to Shane on this parade float. Shane received some superficial injuries, but his wife's near death. Well, Meg's family had long harbored this feeling in their minds and in their heart, kind of, that Shane was a fabricator of his military background. Because at family reunions, Shane would say things that were alerting. Like one time, a family member told me that they were watching Black Hawk Down, and Shane would get up and leave the room claiming, "I can't watch this because it gives me flashbacks from when I was there." Okay. Now, Shane Ladner was a military policeman, and left the service at the rank of a sergeant, which would have been an E5 or maybe an E4. I can't remember if he was either E4 or E5 in his first enlistment. But during Black Hawk Down, he would have been a corporal, he would have been an MP, and he didn't go to Somalia. But so things like that were alerting. He was doing other things that were alerting and saying other things that were alerting to them. But they loved their family member, Meg, and so they told me they put up with him. They kind of rolled their eyes and said, "Okay, if this guy's full of shit, that's okay. We'll put up with him because we love Meg."
Right.
But now they're claiming that his lies are getting them put on parade floats that they had no business being on to begin with, and that cost Meg almost her life.
That takes it to a whole new level.
Yes. So the quote that was given to me was, "Look, we always knew Shane was full of shit, but now his lies are almost getting people killed." And that person is their family member. So they were outraged. They said, "All right, enough's enough." They had no proof. They knew he was a veteran. They knew he had served. But one of the things I learned, Jim, is that, and maybe you'd say the same thing. Being in the law enforcement, we're kind of quasi. We've worked with so many veterans before that we kind of learn the language and we know military speak. And frankly, law enforcement is in a lot of ways structured after the military. And so there's some rub off there.
Right.
But if you're not in law enforcement and you were never a veteran, which is what the family members were. They were never veterans. They don't know how to prove these things. They just have this gut feeling. So they can't ask the right questions or do the investigation themselves. So these family members started complaining loud to anybody that would listen. And what I mean is they started writing letters to congressmen. They started writing letters to people in law enforcement. And where they got the traction was one of their complaints ended up with a local Atlanta Fox News investigative reporter named Randy Travis. And Randy went to work on this, and through the Freedom of Information Act, right there in St. Louis, where you're sitting, Jim, is the National Archives. I'm sure
Yes,
you know
sir.
it well. Well, Randy was able to get a copy of Shane's DD 214. And for your listeners who don't know what a DD 214 is, when you exit the military, you're given a sheet of paper that's called a DD 214. Department of Defense is what the DD stands for. And it lists your military service, your name, your social security number, the dates that you were in, what branch, what medals you earned, what overseas service you did. And at the bottom, it'll have your discharge, which hopefully it's going to say honorable. And these documents are important for benefits, for VA benefits, as far as just job preference, to also help with future jobs that people, when you fill out a job application, people will say on their job application, were you a veteran? And if so, can you attach a copy of your DD 214 to show your service?
It's an official record to verify everything,
Yeah,
correct?
we don't
Yeah,
have anything like that in law enforcement
right.
because it's not law enforcement for the most part is not a federal industry like the military is. So there's not one form that could cover all of law enforcement, but there is one form that can cover all of the Department of Defense. So Randy Travis, this investigative reporter, got a copy of Shane Ladner's DD 214. And I'll stop there. So when the way Shane Ladner ended up on that parade float in Veterans Day, November of 2012, is to be accepted on that parade float, you had to self-submit an essay. And you basically had to say, Jim, hey, this is who I am, this is my military service, and this is how I was wounded. This is a little bit about my family. God bless America. And Show of Support would read all these essays, and for whatever reason, they would pick and choose and say, okay, we would like you to be on our parade float this year. Well, Shane was accepted to be on the parade float based on the essay that he self-submitted. And in that essay, he wrote that he had been wounded in the 1989 invasion of Panama when we went to arrest Manuel Noriega, as you remember, for all the different crimes such as drug smuggling that he was doing as the dictator of Panama. Guys that are younger than us don't really hear a lot about Panama because it's kind of just forgotten about. It was a quick 60-day war,
Right.
but there were a considerable amount of servicemen who died in that invasion. So it's not outlandish to say that I was wounded in Panama because people did get wounded and people did die. The Army Rangers did a famous airborne drop. They jumped, I think, almost a whole battalion in, parachuting into Panama. So there were some real warriors in that invasion.
Yeah, like
And
you
Shane,
said, not a
yeah,
large operation, but very significant.
yes, it was a lot of fighting in a quick amount of time.
Right.
And Shane wrote that he had been wounded in that battle. And I'll get to his wounds and other details later. Well, what Randy Travis was able to find by pulling that DD 214 out of St. Louis was that Shane Ladner was still a senior in high school during the invasion of Panama in 1989.
Red
And
flags.
what Randy did is he ambushed Shane in his parking lot of his apartment complex one day. Shane was getting out of his vehicle and walking to his apartment. And Randy Travis, you've seen it. Randy, we've all seen it on TV. There's the guy with the big video camera on his shoulder, and there's the reporter with the microphone, and they're following you through and saying, what do you have to say about this? What do you have to say about this? And they're asking questions. And a lot of times the bad guy will, cover up his face or put his jacket over his head or say no comment or, things like that. Well, Shane's response to that was just to ignore him and walk straight ahead. And as they were sitting there waiting on the elevator to come down, so because Shane's apartment was on a higher level, he just stared straight ahead at the elevator. It's almost comical. Shane completely ignored him, which is not what someone does when they're innocent of the allegation, right?
Great point.
So Randy was waving this DD-214 in front of him and saying, look, it says here that you were in high school. And matter of fact, here is a photograph from your high school annual of you wearing a tuxedo in your senior class photo, also 1989. So how can this be? And Shane refused to answer. And then there was 5 episodes that were run in this investigative report in the local Atlanta area. And the reason this was news is because the Atlanta area had turned out in support of Shane and specifically in support of Meg. When she was life flighted from Midland, when she was stable enough to be transported from Texas to Georgia, there was when her helicopter landed, there was a police escort to the local hospital. Because one, Shane was a police officer, right? And that's what officers do for each other. They turn out. This was an officer's wife. And 2, there's just this swell of support of this tragedy that happened, and this poor woman was near death. So there was fundraising, and there was prayers, and there was all of these things that you see when these type of tragedies happen. It was a big deal in Atlanta. So the train crash was a big deal in America. Shane Ladner's story was a big deal, and Meg's story was a big deal in Atlanta. And then Randy Travis says, oh, by the way, this might have all been for naught because I have some circumstantial evidence here that says this guy might have been lying. So now you got a scandal. The local police agency where Shane resided, the local sheriff's office, decided to open a case. And the way they opened the case on Shane is the state of Georgia did not have a stolen valor law on the books at this time. The feds did, and we can talk about that, but the state didn't. So the state opened a case on financial fraud. And the financial fraud was this, Jim. In the state of Georgia, if you walk into the license plate office, what we call the tag office, and you present a DD-214 that says that you're a Purple Heart recipient, they'll issue you a Purple Heart license plate. You've seen them as you drive around Missouri,
Yep.
right? Purple Heart, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Veteran. But to get those plates, you have to submit your DD-214 to show that you really did serve, you really were issued that medal. In the state of Georgia, you're taxed based on the value of your vehicle. There's an ad valorem vehicle tax. It's treated as a property tax. However, if you have a Purple Heart license plate, you're exempt from that tax. Okay, there's certain license plates that exempt you from that tax. It's the state of Georgia's way of saying thank you for your service. Well, in total, the 5 years that Shane had this license plate, he had cheated the Cherokee County tax commissioner out of about $1,300. That's how much he would have paid over time for his taxes on his vehicle. So $1,300 is technically a financial felony, a fraud felony in the state of Georgia. So that was the hook that Cherokee County had, is we're going to open a financial fraud case on this guy because we have to do something, because this is headlines all over the city of Atlanta. And people are quite frankly asking the DA's office, what are you going to do about this guy? Is this true? Is it not? So they decided to open a case. The DA requested that the local authorities conduct an investigation. And Shane agreed to submit to an interview. He had not been arrested, but he knew that there had been a case open. The sheriff's office said, hey, We'd like to talk to you about this. We don't want to arrest you if we're wrong. If we're wrong, we'll be happy to admit that we're wrong. Let's sit down and talk about this, and you tell us why we're wrong. Tell us how you really did earn a Purple Heart. So Shane agreed to this interview, and he brought his attorney with him, and it's recorded, audio and video. And at this first sit down in the spring of 2013, so not quite 6 months had expired since the train crash, but let's just say 6 months, give or take.
Okay.
Shane and his lawyer say, okay, we're going to tell you the truth here. Yes, I did earn a Purple Heart, but I didn't earn it in Panama. I was told to say that by my chain of command. Let me tell you how I really earned the Purple Heart. Now, it is true, and it's without dispute, that Shane was stationed as a young E1 right out of boot camp, military policeman, and Sotocano Air Base, which is in Honduras. It is a joint base down in Honduras that the U.S. government has had for 40 years. There's a unit down there on the base called Joint Task Force Bravo, and Shane was attached as an MP to that task force. There were other tenants on the base, different units. Part of the purpose of the base down there was, quite frankly, to do humanitarian ops with the local population, just trying to win hearts and soul, show the American flag in a third world country.
Sure.
But it was also known that this base was a launching pad for Green Berets that were doing counter narcotics missions with the local law enforcement, local military guys in that country of Honduras and other countries as well. Green Berets are famous for embedding with the locals, speaking their language, teaching their military how to fight whatever troubles they have. We do it all over the world. So Shane would see these Green Berets come onto his base, fly off, come back, disappear, etc. Everybody knew what they were doing. No big deal. We've been doing it. It was part of the Reagan war on drugs. It's kind of depicted in some of the Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy movies that we were fighting these counter narco wars down in Central and South America. Well, to do that, you have to have launching pads, and Sotocano Air Base was one of the launching pads. Shane's job down there, without dispute, was there's a skiff that was on that base, and you know what a skiff is, Jim. It's the building that holds all the secrets and the classified information that's going on on that base. We don't just generally put them in our filing cabinet. We keep them in a special facility.
Right, a restricted location.
A restricted location. A SCIF stands for the sensitive compartmented information facility, and it can be in a wartime environment in the early 90s, in a jungle environment, in a third world environment. It can just simply be a wooden building made out of plywood. It can be a tent with concertina wire around it, or it can be what you and I worked in. It can be in the middle of an FBI office on the 30th floor, with remote control doors.
Right.
Right. It can be various shapes and sizes, but the point is it's restricted access, and Shane's job as an MP was to guard the access to the SCIF. And the way that works in the military, because I worked in a SCIF, which is one reason why I was brought into this case, is even though I had full access to the SCIF, and we do it differently in the FBI and in your experience in the military, when you walk up to the front door, you have to show them your ID. And if the ID matches, the SCIF guard will let you in. But before you go in, he's also going to check your bags to make sure you're not bringing in anything that's prohibited, like recording devices, electronics, things that can either purposely or unintentionally make recordings and compromise the classified information that's in the building. And then you repeat the process on the way out. You turn your badge in, or you show him your badge, or he checks your roster to make sure you were in there properly. And then he's going to check your bag on the way out to make sure you're not taking anything out purposely or inadvertently, right? So he's kind of the filter. This police officer, military police officer, is the filter to the SCIF. And that's what Shane's job was for a year. And MPs do that all over the military, all over the world. It's no big deal. It's not alarming. That's the way it works in the military. At least that's the way it worked throughout the 90s. That's the way it worked in Hawaii when I was working in a skip in 1997. We had guards at the gate that checked your bags.
This episode of the Right to Remain Silent True Crime Podcast is sponsored by Graphic Options. When it comes to custom screen printing, embroidery, and promotional gear, Brenda and her team are the real deal. I trust them with everything, whether it's a hat for my consulting business, a shirt for my podcast, or a large order of both. They've never let me down. They don't treat you like just another order. They listen, they care, and they make sure you walk away with something you're proud to put your name on. You have the right to great service and quality, and that's exactly what you'll get at Graphic Options. Visit graphicoptionsonline.com. That's graphicoptionsonline.com, and let them know the Right to Remain Silent podcast sent you. And that gives him an opportunity to see how things work, to hear others that are actually doing that type of thing, hear what they say about it. So I would assume he's kind of a sponge there in that position, soaking up information.
He is. He's in the perfect location. He's hearing everything that's going on, give or take, in the skiff. He's given a top secret clearance for that 1 year that he's working at the skiff in case he inadvertently comes across classified information. He's also hearing all the things that are going on with the Green Berets and, the chow hall talk and the gym talk and the things of that nature. So yes, you're absolutely right. He's soaking all of this up. So he leaves there with a wealth of knowledge. Well, he serves his 4 years. He exits the Army in 1994, and he's issued a DD-214. From Honduras, he goes to Fort Polk in Louisiana. From Fort Polk, he goes to Fort Hood in Texas. And then I think he might get one more transfer to Alabama. But shortly thereafter, in 1994, he's released from the Army. He actually gets out a couple months early. He applied for a hardship discharge. His grandparents were dying. He wrote in his hardship request that he needed to go home and help his grandparents, which is understandable. So they give him a couple months early discharge. He gets issued a DD-214. There's no Purple Heart. There's nothing alarming on that DD-214. That DD-214 goes to archives with the rest of his records in St. Louis, and it sits there for the next decade. Well, from 1994 to 1999, which is a 5-year period, he bounces around with odd jobs. One of the things he does is he works for an exterminating company. Eventually, he settles back into law enforcement. He becomes a jail guard at a couple locations, a couple counties in the Atlanta area. And then finally, and when 9/11 happens, he's a jail guard. And then finally, somewhere around 2003, he'll become a sworn police officer. But now he's doing two things. He's a sworn police officer, and in 1999, he re-enlists, but this time he doesn't go back into the regular army, he goes into the National Guard. So in 1999, he re-enlists in the Georgia National Guard, while he's also, I believe, a jailer at a local municipality. So he's got a full-time job Monday through Friday, and he's got a weekend reservist job with the Guard. Well, 9/11 happens, Jim, and a lot of National Guard units get activated to active duty, which the president can do for 1-year periods. So there's some paperwork that's going to happen here. He gets activated for 1 year. When he leaves the National Guard to go to active duty status for that 1 year, he gets another DD-214, but it's called a National Guard NGB 22. He gets a release from the National Guard, which lists his military history up until that date, no Purple Heart. He goes on active duty with the regular Army for 1 year. He gets released from that. He gets another DD-214. So now he's got two DD-214s, which is not uncommon. One from the early 90s, and now his one from 1 year of active service because of 9/11. While he was activated, he was, I think this time, He was at Camp Merrill in North Georgia at the Ranger Training Battalion, where he was he was an MP at the front gate. So that was his 1 year of duty. He was there to help all military installations kind of reinforced with extra bodies in case of attack. And he was there at this base in North Georgia. That's what he did. After 1 year, he goes back to National Guard status. He's released from active duty. And that DD-214 goes to St. Louis, put into archives, no Purple Heart. 2 active duty statuses, 2 DD-14s, no Purple Hearts. A year or 2 goes by, his unit gets activated again. He serves his 1 year. This time he's at Fort Benning down in Columbus, Georgia, and he's the game warden down there. Not a bad gig, right?
Yeah.
Basically, he's the game warden on a military base. He gets released from active duty. But here's where it gets weird. That DD-214 that he would have gotten he would have received after his 3rd tour of duty should have went to St. Louis in his National Archives. But when Randy Travis and then ultimately the FBI and the local jurisdiction that did the initial investigation, when we request his records out of St. Louis, there's no 3rd DD-214. So the question is, where's this? Where his records are incomplete. We're trying to do an investigation. His records are incomplete. We need to see this 3rd DD-214 so we can rule out the fact that he was ever awarded a Purple Heart.
Right.
So when Shane Ladner comes into this interview with these police officers that I originally had told you about a few moments ago, before his arrest, he walks into that interview and he says, well, obviously the Army lost my 3rd DD-214, but thank God I've got my copy because here it is, and it's the one that says I have a Purple Heart.
Of course.
Okay. So the Army says, well, the Army out of St. Louis and everybody else, such as the Veterans Administration, everybody says, well, we don't have a copy of that last DD-214. Now, we know you were on active duty, but what happened to that DD-214 is a mystery because it's not in your records. Well, that DD-214 had a Purple Heart on it, and it had some other suspicious medals as well, such as a Joint Service Commendation Medal with a V for Valor, which an MP E1 would never, ever earn. There are certain medals that are just given to certain ranks, or when they're earned, they're for certain ranks. And an E1 doesn't get that medal. That's normally a senior enlisted or a mid-level officer medal. So that's suspicious. And Shane gives his copy to the local police agency saying, here, you can have a copy of it. Here's what you need to make you feel better that I really am a Purple Heart recipient. Okay, Shane, it says you have a Purple Heart, but tell us, when did you earn a Purple Heart? It wasn't while you were at a gate guard in North Georgia, and it wasn't while you were the game warden at Fort Benning. So when did you earn a Purple Heart? And he said, it was my first enlistment all the way back to Honduras at Sotocano Air Base. I would go with the Green Berets out on missions. My job was the Green Berets took a command and control cell with them, and my job was to guard the command and control cell while the Green Berets went even further into the jungle and did their thing. They would be able to talk back to this communication facility. I guarded the communication facility, and we came under attack multiple times, and I was wounded in one of these attacks by Contras, Sandinistas. He would never tell who wounded him and what country he was in, because he did what so many stolen valor frauds do. They hide behind this cloak of secrecy. He signed, I signed, and Jim, did you ever have access to a SCIF?
Yes, I did.
Okay, then you signed a non-disclosure agreement as well.
Correct.
We all signed them. Okay. Yep. And then when you left the FBI, Jim, you were read out of your classified status, and you signed it again saying, okay, I understand that The things I learned, I can't talk about, at least not the classified material. I can't
Correct.
reveal the classified material for a certain amount of years, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what he claimed was, I can't tell you what country I was in and the details because I signed a non-disclosure agreement 20 years ago. Okay, now, this is not about me, Jim, but let me give you a personal example.
Sure, absolutely.
In 2008, as an FBI agent, I was tasked to Joint Special Operations Command, known as JSOC. And I went to Afghanistan with SEAL Team 6 and some Army Rangers. And we being other FBI agents, I wasn't the only one there, we supported those organizations out on the objective. We had a mission to go out and add a value on the target when we were killing bad guys. When SEAL Team 6 was killing bad guys, when the Rangers were killing bad guys, we had a mission out there as well. That's as classified as the highest levels that you'll ever see. But I can talk about it. I can tell you what we did. Maybe I can't talk about the technology that we used, or maybe I can't talk about the trade craft, or I can't talk about necessarily specific targets. But I can certainly tell you that I went out in this country and in this province, and we did these missions with these units. Shane Ladner said, I can't talk about any of what I did with the Green Berets because it's all ninja, top secret, G-14 classified, right? The famous Jackie Chan movie, Rush Hour, where the officer uses, I can't tell you because it's G-14 classified, right?
Right.
So I'm like, is this guy for real? Is Shane Ladner really going to use this as his excuse on why he can't tell us, why he can't
Wow.
talk about these things? But look, when you're telling civilians these things, they don't know whether or not to believe you or not believe you
They don't
because
know any better.
they don't know about the classification system within the U.S. government. And they don't know how the military operations work. So it's no shame on them. And they realized it. But they went ahead and arrested him. About a month later after this interview, they decided, all right, we've given him enough time. We're arresting him. So they did. And then they realized he's got this DD-214 and he's going to have a general, he claims, that is going to, as a witness, testify on his behalf. One of the things he said was, I was told to say, when I got wounded, let me back up and say that when Shane Ladner was wounded, he said he woke up in a hospital bed in Panama, and that a colonel came in, attached a Purple Heart to his pillow, and said, if anybody asks how you earned this, tell them you were in the 1989 invasion in Panama. Don't tell them that you were doing counter narcotics missions in Honduras. So that's what Shane said. Okay, I told people I was in Panama. So when I wrote that essay to be on that parade float in Midland, Texas, that's why I said that I was in Panama, is because this unknown colonel walked into my hospital room and told me to say these things. All right. When I heard that story, I immediately thought of the colonel from the Rambo movie. You remember
Was that Colonel Troutman? What was his name?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Look at you. You have a
Big
fantastic
Rambo
memory.
fan here.
Yes. That's immediately what I thought of, is that you got
Yes.
this guy walking in telling this guy what to do.
Well,
Comical, right?
I was gonna ask you, yeah, that is, and I was gonna ask you, coming from a non-military background, when a Purple Heart is provided to someone, does a mysterious figure walk in and just hand it to you, or tag it on a pillow, or that's not how it works typically, is
No.
it?
Well,
Yeah,
no,
there's
ever.
a ceremony and acknowledgement, and
Yes. Well, the way this general fit into this is the general was on the board of visitors for this show of support military parade. And he was prepared to say, when he heard about this story, he was prepared to say that, look, when I was in Vietnam, I saw Purple Hearts attached to pillows. Okay. I talked to the general because, Jim, I knew the general. And you want to know how I knew the general?
yeah,
when I left Hawaii in 1997, my last tour in the Marines, I was an aide for a two-star general. Guess which general it was?
Wow, small world.
The same general that was now on the board of visitors for the Show of Support military parade. I called him on the phone because we had stayed in contact all of these years. And I said, General, I understand that Shane Ladner might want to use you as a witness. Long story short, he said, look, Mark, I saw Purple Hearts attached to pillows. And I said, General, there were 250,000 Purple Hearts issued in Vietnam. Hospitals were full of wounded. And yes, it's conceivable, and I certainly believe you, that if a guy was comatose and and in great pain and in morphine and then knocked out, that yeah, maybe a Purple Heart was attached to his pillow. I don't doubt that you saw that in the 1960s in where 50,000 people were killed in the Vietnam. But that's not happening in 1991 in Honduras with a
Right.
handful of guys. I said, and you know that. I said, at least your gut tells you that. So I'm prepared to say that I saw it, Mark. And I said, okay, that's fine. You say it, but it didn't happen in 1991. Well, I'll jump way ahead. The general never testified at trial that he saw that. So they lost their star witness.
Mm.
So the local authorities reach out to me and say, hey, we understand that you have some experience. He's got a DD 214 that says he has a Purple Heart, and he's got a journal that says that these things did happen with these Purple Hearts attached to pillows. We're afraid that a juror might believe those things. Can you help us? So a long story short, we looked at the DD 214 and what we think happened, talking to other people that served with him at that time. It was mass chaos when he checked out his unit. There were hundreds of people milling around in this administrative office. We think he got a copy of a blank DD 214 and he basically typed it up himself. Or he had someone do it for him. It was one of the two. And then he pulls that and he doesn't put it into his official records. It goes to St. Louis. That's why it wasn't in St. Louis. He keeps the only 2 copies. There's 8 copies of a DD 214. It's in Xerox copies. There's 8 of them. 1 goes to the VA, 2 go to the service member, 3 go to archives, and so on and so on. He has the only 2 copies. The other 6 are missing. The other 6 copies. So how do you overcome the fact that he has this DD 214? You can create doubt maybe by saying, well, it's not in St. Louis, so he must have created it. But they would argue, well, St. Louis lost it because, quite frankly, the military does lose records. It happens. Millions and millions of records, things get lost. So how do you overcome this he said, she said type of thing? So what we did when I got the case, Jim, and I'll cut to the chase real quickly here, is we used his military records. Me and another task force officer who was now working on my Safe Streets task force was a retired Army first sergeant. And he had been a ranger and he knew how to read Army records. We went through those records together and using connect the dots, and it took about a year. We started making phone calls. We did computer searches. We found his entire chain of command from Sotocano in Honduras, from the commanding officer of the base all the way down to a fellow E1 MP private who slept in the barracks with him and was a skiff guard. We found him. Colonel, lieutenant colonel, major, private. And we found the commanding officers of the hospital who would have treated him. Now, keep in mind, this is important for your readers or your listeners. 3 things have to happen for you to receive a Purple Heart. And this is probably the biggest takeaway of anything I'm going to say to you today. There has to be a medical entry in your records by a military hospital, by a military medical officer. That was nowhere ever in Shane's records. Now, in Honduras, there were entries that showed that he twisted his ankle, he had the flu, he had diarrhea, he had a sore throat, he got hit in the nose. All of those are in Honduras medical records, but he got shot in the abdomen, Purple Heart medical records. So those are mysteriously missing. Everything else is there. His Tylenol is there for his cold, but not his Purple Heart.
But the most important piece isn't there.
So that's number 1. You got to have a medical entry. Number 2, there has to be a witness. You can't self-submit a Purple Heart. You can't come back and say, look, I got shot, because hell, you could have shot yourself on a negligent discharge, quite
Right.
frankly. Who knows?
Right.
There has by law, by congressional law, who issues the Purple Heart down to the branches, there has to be a witness. Shane had no witnesses, and during his depositions and during that interview with the police officer, every time he was asked for a witness, he said, I'm sorry, with names, I can't remember anybody that I served with. I can't remember the guys who saved my life, who put me on the helicopter, who sent me to Panama, because I was blacked out. I have no recollection of it. But I was on patrol with these guys, but I don't know any of their names.
All
I don't know my
right.
commanding officer's name. I don't know my squad leader's name. I don't know anything. Number two. And then number three, and here's where it gets tricky, you have to be in a designated combat zone. Okay, Iraq, Afghanistan, Panama. But let me ask you this, Jim, and here's what I didn't know at the time, and I learned it in this investigation. If Captain Phillips is on a ship off the coast of Somalia, and the Somali pirates come and take over his ship, and the SEALs do a rescue of Captain Phillips. You've seen the movie probably with Tom Hanks.
Correct. Yeah.
And one of the SEALs gets injured from a Somali in a gunfight. That's not a combat zone issued by Congress. So does that SEAL get a Purple Heart?
That's a great point. I never thought of that.
Okay, we all know Afghanistan, Iraq, those are combat zones. Vietnam, combat zone.
Right. Clearly
The,
defined.
the coast of Somalia is not a combat zone. The answer is yes. The SEAL gets a Purple Heart, and here's how. Is that each secretary of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, they have the authority to award the Purple Heart when asked to by the command. So in that example, the SEALs command would have wrote up, he was shot by Somalis, here's the witnesses, here's the medical entries. And so we're asking you, the Secretary of the Navy, to issue this Purple Heart on behalf of this SEAL Team 3. And that happens all the time around the world as we go and do these low intensity conflicts that are not in combat zones. But when they do that, Jim, there's a record kept of all of those, right? So the only way Shane Ladner could have got a Purple Heart, since Honduras, South America, Nicaragua, Panama, you pick your country, it was not a combat zone, is it would have had to have been specially awarded by the Secretary of the Army. We brought in a duty expert from the Pentagon who testified at trial that I searched every database going back to World War II. There's no Shane Ladner. There's no social security number for Shane Ladner, and there's none in Honduras, Panama, Nicaragua, pick your country. That lady testified that we would have had a record at the Pentagon for these specially awarded Purple Hearts, and this guy by this name never received one of those. So we put up all of these witnesses at trial. We put up these experts from the Pentagon. We introduced all of these requirements for a Purple Heart, and the jury saw it at trial that this guy is obviously full of crap. He didn't testify on his own behalf. He refused, Fifth Amendment. He didn't testify. And they put up a handful of witnesses that were simply character witnesses. Yes, I served with Shane at Fort Hood, Texas, and I consider him to be a stand-up guy. Yes, I served with Shane in the National Guard in Georgia at Fort Benning when he was the game warden, and I consider him to be a stand-up guy. But they never put up any witnesses that were directly related to the Purple Heart, right? And so they put up 3 or 4 witnesses. They put up his wife for a dramatic effect because guess she comes rolling into the courtroom in a wheelchair, right? Because she doesn't have a leg.
Is she still siding with him at this point?
To this day, yeah. And so she testifies that whatever she's allowed to testify to, she can't testify to what happened down in South America because she has no knowledge, but she can testify to other things that they think helps their case, and it doesn't. The jury convicts him on 6 of the 7 financial fraud things that he's charged with. We did not charge him with stolen valor. because there was no Georgia law at the time. And the Supreme Court had overturned the federal law at that time, and it hadn't been rewritten and signed at the time of his arrest and at the time that he committed these crimes. It would have been invalidated by the overturned Supreme Court law.
Okay.
So there was no stolen valor law that you could hook him on. So what jurisdictions were doing is they were hooking these guys on financial fraud charges more times than not. And we call them stolen valor cases because they are, but we're not charging him with stolen valor. We're actually charging him with financial fraud. The courtroom was full of veterans every day, front row, old guys with hats on, you know, American Legion Post 101.
Yep.
Blogs were going out. The courtroom was packed. I'd been in some high profile cases, like such as my mafia case. This courtroom was the second most packed courtroom I'd ever been associated with every day. In state trial, you could have news cameras in there. And so there was a camera in there every day. Feeds were going out to all the local news channels around America. As this was being broadcast by Fox, all the other Fox feeds would pick up on it in New York and Miami and so on. It was a big case. And the jury was out overnight and they came back and convicted him. Sadly, the judge gave him first offender status, 5 years probation. Okay. We weren't totally surprised at that because the judge didn't like the case to begin with. And that's a whole nother story.
Mm-hmm.
But after 5 years of staying out of trouble, it gets stricken from his record. So today, he's no longer a convicted felon. Now, the world knows that he lied. We proved it in court and the jury said so. Every newspaper in America had that as headline and so on. But here's the real kicker in this story that I'm about to tell you. Of everything that I could just told you, I could have stopped there and this would have been a great story, right? Train crash, secret missions in South America, generals, Purple Hearts, trial, FBI. He sues Fox News, civil deposition. Even though he didn't testify at trial, we were able to play a civil deposition, parts of it at trial for the jury to hear, which absolutely crushed him because he was terrible in his civil deposition. All of that is a great story. Here's the kicker, Jim. When that train hit that parade float, inevitably there's going to be lawsuits. People are going to settle to the tunes of millions of dollars. It's understandable that those families of those 4 dead veterans received enormous payouts from the train. Now, the National Transportation Safety Board ruled the train was not at fault, the train company. But these things get settled. Train companies always pay out. What's it worth to lose your leg? Well, the financial settlement was sealed to the Ladners. They were part of a larger lawsuit with other victims, if you want to call them that were on the parade float. And all of the financial terms were sealed. Now, when I talk to other lawyers that know about these things, the best guesstimate is that Meg Ladner may have received up to the tune of $5 million for the loss of her leg. Now, she's on that parade float as a hapless victim of her husband, right? There's no evidence that she didn't know her husband was lying. So we can't fault her for being on that parade float. Shane's on the parade float. He gets banged up, bad back, trauma, PTSD, whatever you want to call it. Most estimates say he gets $1 million. Okay. The question is, the logical question, why didn't Shane Ladner just plead this case out, plead out to a misdemeanor? All right, you got me. I was lying. I shouldn't have done it. Why go to trial and get raked over the coals? Here's the answer. If he goes to trial, which he did, and he gets convicted, which he did, he still gets to keep the money, even though he's now guilty of a fraud. If he admits and he pleads guilty that he was fraudulently on that parade float, he has to give the money back.
Wow.
To this
Wow.
to this very day, he's no longer a felon, and he keeps the money. Now, a public records search will show you that he lives in a North Georgia community in $1 million home today.
Hmm.
Okay.
Ugh.
So goes the saga of Shane Ladner.
Yeah. Yeah. Unbelievable. Mark, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's not a conclusion that I was expecting.
Yeah. Now, this guy was all about money. He constantly petitioned before this happened, before he was arrested, petitioned the VA for benefits, hearing loss, acid reflux. I hurt my back stepping off a curve. My ears are ringing, and it was always denied. I mean, just outrageous things that he would petition for to try and get disability. He did get a back settlement because he did have a back surgery, so they gave him some money for that. But I mean, who claims acid reflux and accuses the Army of giving me acid reflux?
Right. I've never heard of that.
And so, and as I investigate and people that know him, it's always been about the money for this guy. And so now we see the motivation, perhaps, not that this was some crazy plan from the beginning, but this thing happened to him. It happened to Meg, and there were dollar signs in it at the end of the day. Because why sue Fox News other than to save face? He sued them for, I want to say, $8 or $10 million. And he didn't really even have a case because his case was so bad that the judge issued a summary judgment, which means we're not even going to let this go to trial and let a jury hear it. I'm saying right now, after hearing your deposition and seeing the evidence, you don't have a case. I'm issuing a summary judgment. He appealed that to the appeals court, and the appeals court upheld the summary judgment. So he had a very weak case. But normally when you sue Fox News and you have this trauma to your wife, and it's not unreasonable to think that Fox is going to settle and says, here's $1 million to make this go away. But Fox News, to their credit, said, no, we're not settling this. We're going to take this to civil deposition, and we're going to make you explain how you got your Purple Heart, which ultimately was part of the evidence that we played at trial, which was cartoonish. And he didn't get any money from Fox News either. So his acid reflux and his Fox News were all denied, but ultimately the train company paid out. Now, I don't know how much money he got. I've always said that. I can just give you estimates on what people have told me that are in the legal profession and have some expertise in this. But I can also tell you he's living in $1 million home.
You know, I can only imagine the frustration that you, along with all those veterans sitting in the front row of the courtroom,
Yeah.
felt in this entire scenario.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, let me say one last thing.
yeah.
I have a Marine buddy of mine that I first met at Officers Candidate School. I just spoke with him as a follow up about a month ago. He was shot in Afghanistan in the head, and he shot in the left side of his head, as I recall, and the right side of his body doesn't work very well. He's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. His leg and his arm doesn't work well. Luckily, he's got all his cognitive ability, but the arm and the leg just don't work anymore. They don't work well. He was issued for that trauma. And my daughter had a high school classmate that was killed in Iraq. So one's killed, one's wounded terribly. The government issues them a Purple Heart. It says, thank you for your service. May this medal be some consolation to you. So that's the kind of egregious misrepresentation that Shane Ladner is comparing himself to when he wears this Purple Heart. Is he's saying, I was wounded like those two examples that I just gave you, where a guy died and his family receives the medal on his behalf, or where a guy is now in a wheelchair for the rest of his life and the government issues him a Purple Heart. So it's for veterans, we get it. For civilians, it's important for me to say you need to juxtapose these against each other. This is not just some guy patting himself on the back, and we should just say, okay, what's the big deal? This is a guy claiming that he should be recognized like these other two examples that I just gave you, people that will no longer walk and are no longer on this earth. That was the medal they received. So I think you get my point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you kind of you touched on this before I got to it. You know, clearly you're a proud military veteran that served our country and have many friends that did the same. What, I think you answered this question. What does that Purple Heart mean to you personally?
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to mean blood, sweat, and sacrifice. It's going to mean
Right.
pain, emotional pain, physical pain. Loved ones. That's all they have left now because they had to bury a loved one.
Right.
Guys in a wheelchair, and rightfully so. That's what the country said. This is our token of appreciation. May you wear this medal with honor. So it's just disgraceful. It's shameful, is what it is.
Yeah. And
If you want to say that you earned a medal for bravery in combat, like a Bronze Star, that's shameful. But it's not to the level of shame of saying I got a Purple Heart, in my opinion.
right. Right. And your investigation showed, the trial showed that, just exactly what type of person he is. And, in the grand scheme of things, the financial aspect of it is secondary, but the positive is that those involved and those in the know realize that this individual is and was a fraud,
That's right. You're absolutely right.
and
I'm
and to
sure that every one of his neighbors in the $1 million community knows who he is.
correct, correct,
I'm it's that is the silver lining in this cloud.
correct, and that has to be and is hopefully difficult to live with on a daily basis. And kind of taking this in an upward tick direction. I
All
think
right.
this is a great opportunity to thank legitimate uh, in Purple Heart recipients and to
Yeah.
thank individuals like you, a proud military veteran, a proud Marine, to thank everyone that goes out there and does the right thing and protects our country. So, hey, I want to thank you, number one, for pursuing justice in this individual scenario, in this case. Thank you for doing that. And number two, thank you for your service.
Well, you don't have to thank me. Someone once said I would have done it regardless of the thanks. So I appreciate you saying it, but all veterans have enjoyed their time and would do it again.
Absolutely. And I don't think this is necessary. I think you covered this thoroughly, but I want to ask before we move to conclusion, is there anything that you think we should circle back on or touch on? I think you explained it in great detail, but I want to give you that opportunity.
No, not about this case. This continues to go on, and there's lots of voices out there that are trying to expose these things. So now maybe when your listeners see a headline a month from now, a year from now, maybe about stolen valor, it'll make a little bit more sense to them.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And consider this, speaking today on this podcast, a positive. I think you've enlightened individuals, you've enlightened folks to understand this. It's not just a flashy video 10-second clip on YouTube or social media of stolen valor, and that term is thrown around. No, now people that listen to this individual scenario know what it is and that it goes on out there and to pay attention to it. So great point, Mark. Great point. Well, let's
Yeah.
let's talk about you, since you retired, you've been retired from the FBI for a while now. Can you tell listeners what it is that you're doing post-retirement from the Bureau?
Yeah, sure. I'm still working part-time for the FBI as a contract instructor at one of their schoolhouses. Like you said earlier, we teach HUMINT there. And it's great to still be around the young agents and see what's going on in today's young bureau. It's all taught by old guys like me, so it's the best of both worlds. You get to hang out with the old guys and try and influence the new generation. So I've been doing that for 6 years, and then I teach overseas as well, some similar topics in some friendly environments overseas.
Excellent. And you've got a second book in the works right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's going to be this Stolen Valor case that we just talked about. It's going to be the Shane Ladner story with all the details in it. We're hoping to, myself and the publisher, hoping to have it out next summer.
Outstanding. That'll be on the top of my purchase list. So I'm looking
I'll
forward
let
to.
you know. Yeah, I'll send you
Please
a
do.
copy for sure.
Hey, I'm going to request a signed copy.
You got it. Happy to.
Outstanding. Well, Mark, hey, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I think this is a very, very important topic that people be made aware of. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your service to the country and as an agent with the Bureau as well. So I hope that perhaps in the
You're welcome.
future we can talk again. Maybe once your book comes out, we can have a follow-up discussion as well.
Yeah, sure. There's some other Stolen Valor cases I'll be happy to chat with you about.
All right, outstanding. Well, Mark, thank you. Let me transition to my listeners. I would like to thank you as well for listening to the show. I would encourage you, as always, to please like, follow, share, subscribe to my social media so I can continue to bring you top caliber guests like retired FBI agent Mark Sewell. So thanks again, and everybody stay safe out there. The Right to Remain Silent podcast is brought to you by Streetwise 360 Studios. I would like to again thank today's guest for sharing the story right here on the podcast. Please remember to like, follow, share, and recommend us so that I can continue to bring you high caliber guests sharing their experiences just like we heard today. If your law enforcement agency is interested in training provided by Streetwise 360, or if you know someone that has an interesting law enforcement story to share, please contact me via the website, www.streetwise-360.com, www.streetwise-360.com.